Hi, friends, and welcome back. On today's episode, I'm going to be discussing the power of narrative, and I'm going to say the power of your own personal narrative. And I'm going to go into a little bit of discussion around how we get to these stories, basically, that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are capable of without getting too woo woo and out there. I'm just going to offer some perspective about the minds and the voices and the labels and the tags that we apply to ourselves and how they don't serve us. This conversation was prompted by a call that I was having with a very close friend of mine. When she and I are in the space together, we typically will come to some sort of new or broader perspective. And I appreciate it so much. It just kind of helps seat me further in my own work, and it helps me clarify particular concepts or ideas that I may hold about certain things. And it is just the yummiest thing to me. And I'm so blessed to be able to have people in my life that are walking the same path, that are serious about their journey and understanding all that it means to be a human being and what that entails and trying to shed dysfunction. I really do have a few people around me, not everyone. Now, some people I go to with this conversation and they're like, hey, you know what, miss me with that. I'm just here to enjoy my human experience. I just want to tear it up and eat everything and have great sex and eat great food and travel and experience the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I tend to be a person that is after the deeper things of life, the mysteries. I love sitting in the question of my own personal existence and what all this means and how I got here and what's serving me and not serving me. So, having said that, I understand that that is just not everybody's cup of tea. But I'm grateful to have people around me that speak the same language that I speak. And I mean, we can chew on some of these topics and it can just lead me to a state of glee. So, having said that, I was having one of those conversations again with a friend, and we were talking about personal narratives. And she was reading from A Course in Miracles. If you're not familiar with that, that is a spiritual guidance text, for lack of a better word. You can Google it, you can look it up. It kind of goes into concepts about how to live life better, how to shed dysfunction, how to figure out what this journey is about. And I have found great meaning in reading that particular text. Again, it's called A Course in Miracles. Is not for the faint of heart. I find it extremely complex. And the longer I walk this spiritual path, the more the concepts start to resonate with me and make a little bit more sense. But it is definitely an undertaking. It is definitely a process, not to scare you away from it, because if you are looking for a text that will kind of reveal to you what this human experience is about, in addition to religious texts that do that, the Bible, of course, is a blueprint for living, in my opinion. But if you're not really a religious person, A Course in Miracles might be for you. But let me just put a little warning on there again, it's not for the faint of heart. It can be difficult to understand, but I think most of those spiritual texts are. I understand that I think it's called the Bhagavad Gita, which is out of the Hindu tradition, is difficult to understand as well. And the Bible's difficult to understand. So, having said that, she's reading from that particular text, and it raised a concept that what we're doing is trying to carve out or mine our spiritual existence from the perspective of being a soul, and that all the other stuff around us is just stuff that we're gathering: the cars, the houses, the shoes, even the relationships, for that matter, are just kind of things that we're picking up and that we're gathering along the way. We think that those things are actually us, and we define ourselves by the material things or the relationships. But surprise, surprise, that really is a very limited aspect to who and what you are. So we were kind of fleshing that out, and that's very true. I think in the Hindu tradition, someone who practices that particular discipline is going to know better than me, and they're probably going to check me on it if I have it wrong. But they refer to that as Maya, in other words, and I think it's spelled Maya. All the other things outside of who we actually really are as spirits or souls having a human experience, all that stuff is really secondary. This body that we carry, it's just something that we've gathered along the way. And when our journey is ended as a soul, the body actually will return to the earth. And that's a new concept because we have been told that, or led to believe, or just the mind tells us that our thoughts, that our body, that all of that is just who we are. And we have neglected the attention on the soul, which is what this whole thing is really about. Your soul is eternal. It is much broader than what you put on it every day, as far as a shirt or a pair of pants. It is much broader than what somebody said to you that made you angry. It's much broader than you just going to the gym and doing a couple curls to get your arms and your biceps in shape. We're all just so much bigger than that. And we have neglected the understanding that we are souls and spirits first inside of these bodies and with these thoughts. And from that perspective, everything about everything that we're doing looks completely different. And so that was one aspect of the conversation that we were having, and we were fleshing that out. But another aspect of that conversation was the labels, plural, that we are picking up along the way, in addition to gathering all of these things and gathering these relationships and gathering these material things. We are also gathering certain labels and a certain narrative and a certain truth about ourselves that may or may not be true on the surface, but is definitely not true from the aspect of defining who and what you are. So, say for example, I have a label of being a Black woman, and there could be a certain narrative that gets assigned to that perhaps I can't be a CEO, or I can't be president, or I can't do certain things based on the label and the associated narrative with that. And so we don't realize that as we've gone through life, we are picking up and we are collecting all of these things that don't really belong to us. For example, if you were raised by a stay at home mother, you may have the narrative that it is a woman's responsibility to be at home with her children, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you may find another woman whose mother was a doctor who doesn't have that particular label, who's like, look, my responsibility is out in the world, and I'm going to do the best that I can to work with these kids, but they're going to be all right. I need to pursue my mission in the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just comes down to what you decide is true for you based on what you want. And I hope that makes sense. In other words, what's happening is a lot of us are settling for the narratives that we picked up along the way that really don't belong to us, or is not really what we want. You may find a woman that gets to the end of her life after she stayed at home with her kids and raised them and been more of a traditional wife to her husband at the end of her journey or towards the end of her journey, she may have the notion of, you know what, I really wish that I would have gone to medical school. And I know someone that's like that. In other words, she settled into the label that it is a woman's responsibility to stay at home with her children when that wasn't really what she wanted. And so the spiritual work is being able to transcend the labels, being able to transcend the collective conditioning that society holds that says what's true for you if you are a woman, if you are a Black woman, if you come from the ghetto. The spiritual work is being able to understand that these are all just labels and associated narratives that you're picking up that may or may not belong there, may or may not belong to you, and definitely aren't true to the extent that they define who and what you are. And so when you find people like an Oprah Winfrey, even like a Michael Jackson, or even a Judge Joe, I think his name is, that came from a hard upbringing and was able to go on and become an attorney and a judge and then get that show. They were people that decided that the narrative didn't apply to them. In other words, I know what's going on outside my window. I know what's true for my father, Joe Sr. I know what's true for all of my uncles. I see what's true for my mother because they've accepted that, but I'm not going to accept it. And I'm going to believe that something else is possible for me, and that is the spiritual work. And enough of us aren't doing that. We're just settling for what we're picking up. And so I would encourage you today that if there are labels that are defining who you are and keeping you from doing that thing that you want to do, that you start to examine those. You start to look deeper into that and decide. It may be true that I'm from the ghetto, and I am. And it may be true that people that come from where I come from don't do certain things. But the question becomes, is that true for you? That's the work. And to the extent that you can start shedding what belongs there and what doesn't based on your specific desire. If you desire to stay at home with your children and you've looked into the depths and the recesses of your heart and mind, and you're like, you know what? This is my calling. This is my work. To stay at home with these children, to make sure that they grow up to be great citizens and that they contribute positively to the world. That is a noble undertaking. And if that is who you truly are, then do that. But if that's not true for you, and our society has made that true for more women than it is truly possible for, or truly true for, I should say, just because we hold that notion coming from previous generations. Patriarchy defined what was true for women. So you have a lot of women in previous generations that stayed home with their kids because they were limited. They weren't permitted to go out into the world and accomplish very much at all. And so a lot of us, generations later, we still are under the memory of that. We are still under what our grandparents modeled for our mothers and what our mothers modeled for us. The spiritual work is deciding, is that true for me or not? Or is that just something that I've picked up, a label, a narrative that I am carrying that does not belong to me? In other words, am I staying home with my children because of a patriarchal definition of what is possible for a woman? And I'm just using that particular example. I'm not trying to pick on women that choose to do that. I'm just using that because that's a very clear example of how people pick up narratives. It's the same for a lot of men. They grow up seeing their fathers as infidels, lying down with women over here, over there, a lot of children out of wedlock. And so when they have sons, their sons pick up the memory of that. In the Christian discipline, we refer to that as a generational curse. And so I will kind of ascribe to that, in that it can be somewhat of a curse, but it's not something that is not breakable. All it takes is awareness. All it takes is a decision that I will not be that. And you'll find some people do that. Some people either go the way of who their parents were based on what their parents modeled for them and based on that memory. And some kids very early on will take a stand, like my father was a drunk or my father was a womanizer, and I will not be that. And they make a conscious decision and a conscious stand that I'm going to be present with my children and raise them up to be great human beings because my father was absent from me. So, saying all that to say, it doesn't have to be true for you. And we aren't carrying the awareness of the fact that we're carrying these narratives and labels, and that they are cursing us and defining our potential and limiting us in certain ways. And we aren't breaking free from the bonds of them. We aren't making the decision, okay, I come from a legacy of A, B, C, and D. I come from a legacy of people that were afraid to break out of the box and go to college. They talked about they wanted to go to college, but they just never did it. They made excuses, or I can't get the money, or this, that, and the other. Is that true for me? If I really want to go to college, can I go to college? And sometimes it's just sitting there and thinking from a logical perspective and being able to separate yourself from all of that baggage that you're carrying and all of those voices and labels and narrative, and saying, you know what? I want to go to college. I don't care what they did. I want to go to college. People are going to college every day. They come from similar backgrounds. They find a way. They find the money. And if it's true for one person, it can be true for me. And enough of us simply aren't doing that. So I wanted to pop in here today and talk about that. The spiritual work is where everything is, guys. It is where your happiness is. It is where your peace is. It is understanding who and what you are, and beginning to push the bar, to raise it, to edge it out even further of what you know to be possible for yourself. And it's only in digging into the recesses and figuring out what's holding you back, that you're going to be able to press further into the fullness of who you actually are. So start looking for the signs, the discomfort, the pain, that's telling you that the way that you're living is not true. Because when something is true for you, it feels really freaking great. So let the pain, let the discomfort guide you to what is not true for you. If you're sitting somewhere and you're saying, I hate my job, something's off. Start looking for the label. Is the label that you believe, you know what, I got 3 kids, I can't go back to school? Is that the label that you're carrying? No one's gonna hire me at my age. Is that the label that you're carrying? Is that the narrative that you're telling yourself? Start following the trail. Wherever there's pain, get a piece of paper and a pen and start writing out what it is that you believe to be true about your particular situation and why that is causing you pain. And as you start fleshing that out, start separating yourself from it. That was true for my mother, or that's true for people in my neighborhood, or that's true for people of my race, or that's true for people of my gender. But that doesn't have to be true for me. In that sense, we come here as souls and we've gathered a lot. And I don't want to kind of come off and say that this is easy work, because it's not easy work. It's necessary work if you want to get to a place of happiness and freedom. But if you've been gathering something for 50 years, it's not going to necessarily fall overnight. It could, but some of us have to work a little bit harder at it and be a little bit more disciplined at it. But you got to start. You got to start looking for it and figuring it out and being willing to say, you know what, it's true for them, it's not true for me. I come here as a blank slate, And that's just something that I gathered. That is not what is true for me. It's something that I picked up. It's almost like we all remember that kid growing up, or that person in school that was running with the bad crowd and doing what the bad crowd did. But at the core of who they were, everybody knew that's not who that person is. He or she would not be behaving that way if they weren't associated with that crowd. And this is kind of similar in that we are acting and behaving in a way simply because we have gathered and we have picked up and we are carrying things that aren't us, that aren't true to our nature. And once we shed that stuff, once we get rid of the bad crowd, an entirely different person emerges. And so do the work, write it out, start telling yourself, I'm a clean slate. And so if I need to learn discipline, I'll learn discipline. If I need to get courage, I'll find courage. Whatever it takes to move you beyond that particular label or narrative, do it. And sometimes simply the awareness is enough. As soon as you get the aha moment and you say, wait a minute, I'm carrying that guilt because my mother carried that guilt. Sometimes just like that, you can drop it. Or I'm living my life in fear because my mother lived her life in fear. Sometimes just the awareness is enough to begin to start the process of shedding it and letting it go. So I hope you guys find value in that. If you have a journal, pick your journal up, write in your journal, get to the deeper things, get to the heart of who you are, figure out what's not serving you, let it go. Begin to redefine what is true for you. Start with that clean slate. Shed those labels. Shed those narratives. If you want to read A Course in Miracles, I can recommend that. Again, with the caveat that it can be a little bit difficult, but it's one of those things as you keep reading and working with it, over time, it will start to make more and more sense to you. Or if not, pick up whatever book is characteristic to you and your particular spiritual discipline, whether that's the Bible, or whatever book is relative to what you believe, and allow that to strengthen your faith and reveal to you more truths about who you are, because every spiritual book is about that. We've mistaken it and we think it's just about morality and telling people how to live, and being able to exclude this group because they aren't doing it and this group over here is doing it. It was none of that. Those truths that are evident in all of those pieces of work is about getting us to understand our human experience. And so when you read it from that perspective, you're going to oftentimes see something completely different. So if you need that shoring up, find a text that you can read and it just reminds you of your spiritualness. And that first and foremost, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you are a spirit and a soul. And allow those texts to pull you deeper into that understanding and knowledge. If you pray, pray. If you meditate, meditate. All of those practices remind you that your spirit is really what you are, and that the rest of this stuff is just stuff that you're gathering along the way. All right, guys, love you. Thanks for listening.